and the transformation of humans, which it's underway, and we're going to, I mean, God, we're all being faced with this, unfortunately, this decision whether or not we want to become cyborgs and allegedly live forever with this Luciferian technology, or not. And I'm not sure how what the option is. I don't know that we're going to really have that option under this totalitarian control of Lucifer. But to answer the rest of your question, he is known by many names. In Sitchin's work about his translations or interpretations of the Sumerian text of the gods, he is known as Enki. But I mean, different cultures call him different things in various times. So he's also known to the Nordic people as Loki. The Akkadians called him Ea. The Egyptians called him Ptah. One of his titles is Lucifer, which means the light bearer, because he is a very radiant being. He does have the ability to, I mean, this is what in Christian terms, when they say the glory of the Lord, they're talking about the light that emanates from him. And his son is also very, very key to all this. In fact, that's what I've been working on this article, Technocide. I know this is very highly controversial for people, but Lucifer is the god of all religions on this world, including Christianity. And he does have a son, a particular son. So Lucifer is the Father in heaven. That's how he portrayed himself to me when I met him in 1985. And it was very confusing. It took me a long time. I mean, actually almost 30 years before I finally figured out when he said he was the Father. He didn't say I'm Lucifer, and this is the thing about the Anunnaki, is that they have the more titles that one has, the higher the ranking in that. Okay, so as I said, his title as the light bearer, he's also known as the water bearer, but he's also known as the father of the archons. The Greek term, it just means the lords, the rulers. He's also, in Christian terms, he's considered the father of all lies. A lot of people confuse him with Satan, and because the current mythology is that, when Lucifer came to earth, that's when he had the name Satan. And that is not accurate. According to what Wes Penray's research shows, Lucifer is actually another name for Enki, or Lucifer's son. He has many names, but he's known as Marduk, or Ra, as in R-A, for, in Egyptian terms. He's also called Amun-Ra. And, that's something that some people really have a hard time with, that all the Christian prayers are ending in Amen or Amen. This is the way some people pronounce it, but it literally is Amun-Ra. And that would be Lucifer's son. The conflict, as I understand it, started in the Orion Empire when Enki was denied the kingship of that empire. So he decided to go off on his own and create an illegitimate or rival empire. So that literally caused a civil war, an intergalactic civil war. Most people feel that this was just because of his pride or ego, but that doesn't explain why he was passed over. I mean, it was his legitimate birthright to become the king of the empire. But some information that I have, and anybody can read it if you're interested, on my website in the article section. It's called The Birth of the Archons. There was a book written by a friend of my father's. His name's Norman Paulson. He's passed away now, but originally it was called Sunburst: Return of the Ancients. It's now called Christ Consciousness. But in that book, Norman talks about how in the 1950s he was contacted by benevolent human extraterrestrials, so he says. And one of the things they told him was that how Lucifer had gone mad. Actually, Lucifer and his crew, as a spacefaring group, had gone into. I mean, they formerly were builders of worlds, and they at some point they ventured into an area, a zone that was forbidden because it was dangerous, and for some reason they felt that they would be okay, and they were curious, and they went in there, and they went completely insane because they were so badly traumatized that their spirit was fragmented. We would call that multiple personality disorder. In other words, that they literally have multiples or alters. Sometimes it's called echoes. And they did manage to find their way out of there, but by the time they got out, they were completely mad, and they still are, and that's the problem. That is the real problem. And as far as I can tell, that's the real reason why he was passed over for kingship of the Orion Empire.
Because he basically lost his mind and would have been probably a poor representative of this empire.
To say the least, it would have been irresponsible if his parents had allowed him to ascend to the throne, because he was just, and he still isn't. Right, if you look at this world, which is part of his empire, as I said, the way he conducts things it's all based on predatory, parasitic, psychopathic behavior, and the people that follow him and work for him are essentially the same way. One of the other key aspects of all this, as we were saying before about parasites, is that, and it talks about this in the book by Norman Paulson, that when he and his crew were in this forbidden zone, they not only suffer from multiple personalities, but they inadvertently, unintentionally created what we would call demons. They're little thought forms. Yeah, they're thought forms. They're non-physical, but they are they're parasitic in the sense that they're. I mean, again, the Christians would just call them demons. The Muslims called them jinn, but they were brought here when Lucifer, Enki, whatever you want to call him, when he and his crew accidentally created these mental parasites. They were infected. They infected themselves with this thing, these parasites that feed off of negative energy. It's emitted through our DNA when we hurt ourselves or others. And so he brought those things here, and it infected pretty much all life on this world, because anything that's biological, has DNA, is essentially a power source or food for these parasites, as long as we are hurting ourselves or others. So that's again why everything is sort of trauma-based. Even all religions, if you notice, there's an element of blood sacrifice or trauma in all of that. I mean, pretty much they're all feeding into that, literally, feeding into that system.
And they have harsh patriarchy as another commonality. The original Divine Mother forms of worship were basically eradicated and supplanted by this harsh patriarchy.
Yeah, that was deliberate. The eradicating of all indigenous tribal culture over time was a way of putting another level of worker in place. And so there's been multiple genocides here by Lucifer in order to continue his agenda. So this is nothing new. What's happening here? I mean, look, what Atlantis was very similar to what we have right now, in the sense that a lot of genetic manipulation and high technology, and ultimately the goal was to further support the expansion of Lucifer's empire in direct competition with his family's empire. And I'm pretty sure that's why they told him to stop. And this is where the Great Flood comes in, like 12,000 years ago. I don't know if it was a natural event or if somebody initiated it, but they told Lucifer, just stand down. Do not try and save this. What you're doing is completely illegal. It's immoral, and it's totally illegitimate. So. Of course he agreed, but obviously he only to a point. He agreed just enough so that they wouldn't directly attack him, he preserved a portion of it and restarted his version of what he considered to be life. He put it all back here the way he wanted to serve him. So, in essence, he really does believe he's the father of mankind here. It's not exactly true, but it's true enough. He can make that statement that modern mankind is his doing. And that's why you have a lot of people, especially in the New Age community, who think Enki, Lucifer, is the good guy.
Yes.
And it's not the case at all.
Yes, and I think that Sitchin, of course, had a lot to do with that.
He did.
Especially the book, what is it, The Lost Book of Enki, which basically is an apologia where he's coming up with all these excuses why he didn't basically unleash this massive war upon the whole planet.
Well, that book, unfortunately, people need to be careful with what they read. If at the beginning he says this is just conjecture on his part, it's not even his interpretation of any lost book at all. It's just him taking like a mental holiday and interpreting in his mind what he thinks Enki would have said. Okay, so and that's really dangerous because I'll give you another example. Billy Meyer basically did the same thing. He claimed he was having mental conversations with Ptah, and that's where a lot of the contact notes come from. But most people would never have equated that with Enki or Lucifer, and they still don't. And that's a problem. It's a real problem. But you see how Sitchin became such an authority figure in quite a few people's minds. And then the same was true for quite a while with Billy. Billy Meyer is considered, or he likes to consider himself as like a prophet and the only real contactee, and he's chosen, special, right? And his information is correct. But this is a game they've been playing with us for a long time. They don't really want us to have access to too much information, and any information that we do have is usually badly distorted, and that's done intentionally to keep us confused and divided, actually.
What seems to be Enki's / Lucifer's endgame? What does he seem to want as a final outcome?
Good question, and that's probably the most important thing that people need to understand, if they can wrap their minds around this at all, is that the end game for Lucifer and Enki is to take over the Orion Empire, which he feels, as I said before, is his birthright. He wants to be the number one king and the only ruler of that empire. So he is grooming us, and I'm sure we're not the only ones, but specifically on this world, since this is where we are, this whole thing with the AI and nanotechnology, et cetera, is all designed to upgrade us to a point where we can actually be exactly what he needs us to be, which is soldiers that would design to help him break into the court of Orion.
Yes, he's going to need foot soldiers. That's what people need to understand about the whole concept of what Richard Dolan describes as the breakaway civilization, and what others call the secret space program, because it would be highly difficult for any standalone secret space program to develop organically without coming under the malign influence of this hive mind parasite Luciferian virus. It would be almost impossible for them to screen that influence out.
They didn't, and that's a good point. It's a really good point that most people have no idea because they don't have the proper context for these events. So the secret space program was, again, another ploy, and they have taken people off to Mars and the Moon, etc. They've also upgraded them, given them access to technology, but those were just the pioneers. The first selected chosen ones, and it was just the first step, and it was all done secretly. The next step is going to be more overt, and I write about that in my book, the article Digital Deception, page 4. I show that many different examples that the Europeans Space Union is going to build a village on the moon using 3D printers, and that's coming very soon. The next decade, 10 years from now, we're going to have, if everything goes as according to plan, humans will be allowed to start living on the moon, and beyond that to Mars. And so that's the public version of in other words, the secret space program precludes everything. But the not so secret space program is coming, but it's all coming from the same source. It's not our human ingenuity or the pioneer spirit. This is all contrived by and controlled by the Luciferians to serve their agenda, not ours.
Yeah, and another key point also is the pervasive references to Orion.
Yeah.
Richard Hoagland goes into great detail about how so many of the iconic symbols from NASA pertain to Orion.
They do, and in fact, the NASA's mission, 2030 mission to Mars, the manned mission to Mars, will be in an Orion spacecraft. So it's pretty blatant, but like I said, this is very confusing. A lot of the rumors in the New Age community, mostly based on channeled information, is that that Orion Empire is evil, and Zecharia Sitchin basically says this too, that Enki is the victim, and that his family are the one to blame. And in fact, it's the opposite, and I do think that's the case. That he's been lying to us, and that he's actually the perpetrator.
We see that over and over because in the Sitchin scheme of things, Enki saved us. Enki was our father. He taught us agriculture. He taught us to domesticate animals. He basically created what amounts to modern civilization, when in reality he is this all-pervasive Luciferian oppressor.
Yeah, and he's all. You're right. He wants the Father, Savior. Yeah, he wants us to worship or work for him, to be part of his empire.